The crack of Trevor Hawkins' spine echoed through the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo Arena like a gunshot, silencing 23,000 voices in an instant. One moment, the defending world champion was riding Diablo's revenge with the grace that had made him a legend. The next, he was crumpled in the dirt like a broken doll, his body twisted at an impossible angle, dust settling around him like a shroud. Jake Morrison watched in horror from the chutes as the medical team sprinted across the arena, their boots pounding against the packed earth. Trevor wasn't moving. Not his arms, not his legs, not even the slight rise and fall of his chest that every rider looked for after a hard fall. The only motion came from the pool of blood slowly spreading beneath his shattered helmet. "Jesus Christ," whispered Carlos Mendoza, Jake's traveling partner and best friend since high school. His face had gone ashen beneath his tan, and his hands shook as he gripped the chute rails. He's not. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the circuit's head veterinarian who doubled as emergency medical personnel, dropped to her knees beside Trevor's motionless form. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for a pulse, examining the unnatural bend in his neck, calling out medical jargon that sounded like a foreign language to the stunned cowboys watching from the rails. "Spinal injury, possible C3 fracture," she shouted to the paramedics rushing in with a backboard. "He's got a pulse, but it's weak. We need to move fast but careful." The arena had fallen into an eerie quiet, broken only by the sound of medical equipment and the distant sobbing of Trevor's wife, Amanda, who had pushed through security and now knelt in the dirt beside her husband of 8 years. Her perfectly styled hair was now streaked with dust and tears, her rhinestone-studded shirt stained with his blood. "Trevor, baby, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible but somehow carrying across the silent arena. "The kids need you. I need you. Don't you dare leave us." Jake had known Trevor for over a decade, had traveled the circuit with him, had been best man at his wedding. They'd shared hotel rooms and hospital waiting rooms, celebrated victories and nursed defeats over countless beers in roadside bars. Trevor Hawkins was more than just the world champion. He was the face of professional rodeo, the cowboy that sponsors loved and fans adored. He was supposed to be invincible. "What the hell happened?" asked Jim Harrison, the stock contractor whose bull had just ended a career and possibly a life. Jim's weathered face was pale, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something Jake had never seen before, fear. In 30 years of providing bucking stock for rodeos across the country, Jim had never had a ride go this wrong. "Diablo's revenge has been on the circuit for 4 years, muttered Mike Sullivan, another veteran rider who was scheduled to compete later that evening. "That bull's never hurt anybody. Trevor's ridden him twice before without any problems." But Jake had seen it all unfold from his position at the chutes, and something about the ride had been different from the start. Diablo's revenge had come out of the gate with a fury that seemed almost unnatural, his movements erratic and desperate rather than the controlled power Jake had come to expect from elite bucking bulls. The bull had spun hard to the right, then suddenly reversed direction with a violence that caught even Trevor off guard. "I've never seen Diablo move like that," Jake said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. It was like he was trying to destroy Trevor, not just buck him off. Carlos nodded grimly. That last spin, it was like the bull knew exactly how to break him. The paramedics worked with silent efficiency, carefully immobilizing Trevor's neck and spine before lifting him onto the stretcher. As they carried him toward the waiting ambulance, Amanda walking alongside and holding his limp hand, the crowd began to stir from its shocked silence. But instead of the usual cheers and applause that followed even the hardest falls, there was only an uncomfortable murmur of voices, like people whispering in a church. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice finally crackled over the sound system, though his usual enthusiasm had been replaced by somber professionalism. "Due to the injuries sustained by Trevor Hawkins, tonight's competition will be postponed. Please keep Trevor and his family in your thoughts and prayers." As the crowd began to file out of the arena, their conversations muted and their children asking questions that had no good answers, Jake found himself staring at the spot where Trevor had fallen. The medical team had cleaned up most of the blood, but there was still a dark stain in the dirt, a reminder of how quickly everything could change in 8 seconds or less. "You still planning to ride tomorrow?" Carlos asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Jake pulled his hat down low over his eyes, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Tomorrow's event in Austin was supposed to be his chance to climb higher in the standings, maybe even crack the top 15 for the first time in his career. But right now, the thought of climbing onto the back of a 1,500-pound animal seemed less like competition and more like Russian roulette. "I don't know, man," he admitted. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that." "None of us have," Carlos replied. "But Trevor wouldn't want us to quit. He'd want us to ride for him." As they walked toward the parking lot, Jake's phone buzzed with text messages from other riders across the circuit, all asking the same questions. How bad was it? What really happened? Is Trevor going to make it? But Jake had no answers. Only the image of his friend's broken body burned into his memory, and a growing sense that something fundamental had changed in the world of professional rodeo. The drive back to their hotel was conducted in silence, both men lost in their own thoughts as the lights of Houston faded in the rearview mirror. Jake stared out at the Texas landscape, thinking about Trevor's kids, 8-year-old Tyler and 6-year-old Emma, and wondering how Amanda would explain to them that Daddy might never come home the same way he'd left. By the time they reached the Motel 6 where they'd been staying, Jake's phone had buzzed with updates from the hospital. Trevor was alive but paralyzed from the neck down, with doctors uncertain whether the damage was permanent. The prognosis was grim, and even if he survived, his riding days were over. At 29 years old, Trevor Hawkins had gone from world champion to quadriplegic in the span of 8 seconds. "This is going to change everything," Carlos said as they sat on the edge of their respective beds, staring at the wall-mounted television that was showing highlights from earlier rodeos where cowboys rode and walked away unscathed. "Sponsors are going to get nervous, insurance companies are going to start asking questions, and parents are going to think twice about letting their kids anywhere near a bull." Jake nodded, understanding the implications. Professional rodeo operated on a delicate balance of danger and spectacle, where the threat of injury was part of the appeal, but actual catastrophic injuries were rare enough to be forgotten between seasons. Trevor's accident had shattered that illusion, reminding everyone that the line between triumph and tragedy was measured in heartbeats and vertebrae. What if this wasn't just an accident? Jake asked quietly, voicing the thought that had been nagging at him since he'd watched Diablo's Revenge in action. What if there's something else going on? Carlos looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the bulls are being affected by something? Drugs, disease, environmental factors, something that's making them more aggressive or unpredictable." It was a disturbing thought, one that opened up possibilities neither man wanted to consider. If the bucking stock was compromised somehow, it wouldn't just affect the riders. It would threaten the entire sport, from the smallest local rodeos to the multimillion-dollar professional circuit that employed thousands of people across the country. "We need to be careful who we share theories like that with," Carlos warned. "Start talking about conspiracy theories, and people will think we've lost our nerve." But as Jake lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 10, he couldn't shake the feeling that Trevor's accident was just the beginning. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice was whispering that the summer of 2025 was going to be different, darker, and more dangerous than any season that had come before. And in hospitals and veterinary clinics across Texas, medical professionals were starting to notice patterns in their patients, both human and animal, that didn't quite fit the usual profile of rodeo injuries and livestock behavior. The silent summer was just beginning, and the echoes of Trevor Hawkins' fall were already spreading across the circuit like ripples in a pond, carrying warnings that most people weren't ready to hear. If that story already moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like so you don't miss any of our stories. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been staring at the same set of blood test results for 20 minutes, but the numbers weren't making any more sense than they had when she first pulled them up on her laptop screen. Sitting in her mobile veterinary clinic parked behind the Austin Rodeo grounds, she cross-referenced Diablo's Revenge's post-incident blood work with samples from 3 other bulls that had shown unusual behavior over the past month. The pattern was undeniable, even if she couldn't explain it yet. Elevated cortisol levels, irregular liver enzymes, and traces of compounds that shouldn't have been present in healthy livestock. But most disturbing were the neurological markers that suggested severe stress, or possibly even neurological damage in animals that had been perfectly healthy just weeks before. "Dr. Mitchell?" Jake Morrison's voice came from outside her trailer, followed by a gentle knock on the door. "Do you have a minute to talk?" She closed her laptop and opened the door to find Jake standing with his hat in his hands, his face bearing the same haunted expression she'd seen on too many riders' faces since Trevor's accident 3 days ago. Word had spread quickly through the tight-knit rodeo community. Trevor was alive but would never ride again, confined to a wheelchair and dependent on others for even the most basic functions. Of course, Jake. Come on in. She gestured to the small seating area in her trailer, noting how the normally confident cowboy seemed diminished somehow, as if the weight of what he'd witnessed had physically pressed down on his shoulders. I've been thinking about what happened in Houston, Jake began, settling into the chair across from her desk. And I can't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Diablo's revenge before he ever left the chute. The way he moved, the way he reacted, it wasn't natural bull behavior. Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. What specifically did you notice? Bulls buck because it's instinct, right? They're trying to get something off their back, but there's usually a rhythm to it, a pattern. But Diablo was frantic, like he was in pain or scared rather than just trying to throw Trevor. Jake paused, running his hands through his hair. I've been riding for 15 years, document. I know bull behavior, and that wasn't it. Have you shared these observations with anyone else? Carlos knows what I'm thinking, but we haven't talked to anyone official. We were hoping you might have some insights, maybe something from your examination of Diablo after the incident. Dr. Mitchell weighed her options carefully. The preliminary results she'd been studying were concerning, but they were also preliminary. Making accusations or raising alarms based on incomplete data could cause panic throughout the rodeo community, potentially destroying careers and livelihoods. But if her suspicions were correct, staying silent could cost lives. Jake, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us for now, at least until I can complete more comprehensive testing. She pulled up the blood test results on her laptop screen and turned it toward him. These are Diablo's blood work results from after his encounter with Trevor. And these, she opened another file, are results from 3 other bulls that have shown unusual behavior in the past month. Jake studied the screen, though the medical terminology meant little to him. What does it mean? It means that something is affecting the bucking stock, something that's causing severe stress responses and possibly neurological damage. The question is what, and whether it's accidental contamination or something more deliberate. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. You're saying someone might be doing this on purpose? Drugging the bulls to make them more dangerous. I'm saying the evidence suggests external factors are involved, but I can't determine intent without more investigation. Dr. Mitchell closed her laptop and leaned forward. Jake, I need your help. You and the other riders know these animals better than anyone. If more bulls start showing unusual behavior, I need to know about it immediately. Before Jake could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent text message from Carlos. Turn on Channel 7 News. Now! Dr. Mitchell found the remote and switched on the small television mounted in the corner of her trailer. The local Austin News was broadcasting live from the rodeo grounds, where a reporter was standing near the bucking chutes with a microphone in hand. Second incident in just 4 days has the rodeo community asking serious questions about safety protocols, the reporter was saying. This afternoon, during a practice session at the Austin Rodeo, 24-year-old rider Danny Rodriguez was seriously injured when his bull, a normally docile animal named Gentleman's Choice, threw him into the arena fence with unusual violence. Jake felt his blood run cold. Danny Rodriguez was a rising star in the sport, known for his technical skill and calm demeanor. More importantly, Gentleman's Choice was exactly what his name implied, a reliable, predictable bull that was often used to help younger riders build confidence. According to witnesses, the reporter continued, the bull's behavior was completely out of character, leading to speculation about possible factors affecting the livestock used in professional rodeo competition. Dr. Mitchell muted the television and turned to Jake. That settles it. We're dealing with something systematic, not isolated incidents. She stood and began gathering files from her desk. I need to examine Gentleman's Choice immediately, and I need you to help me identify other riders who might be willing to share observations about unusual bull behavior. Doc, if word gets out that the bulls are being drugged or poisoned or whatever this is, it'll destroy the sport, Jake said quietly. There are thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on rodeo, riders, contractors, arena workers, vendors. If fans stop coming because they think the competition is compromised, and if we don't figure out what's happening, more riders are going to end up like Trevor Hawkins, Dr. Mitchell replied firmly. Or worse. As they prepared to leave the trailer, Jake's phone rang. The caller ID showed Amanda Hawkins' name, and he hesitated before answering, not sure he was ready to hear updates about Trevor's condition. Jake! Amanda's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. I'm at the hospital with Trevor, and the doctors want to ask you some questions about what you saw during his ride. They're trying to understand what could have caused such severe injuries from what looked like a routine fall. Amanda, I'll be there as soon as I can, Jake promised, though his stomach churned at the thought of seeing his friend in a hospital bed, paralyzed and dependent on machines to keep him alive. There's something else, Amanda continued, her voice breaking. Trevor's been having episodes, seizures, the doctors call them. They say it's not uncommon with spinal injuries, but, Jake, he keeps talking about the bull. Even when he's barely conscious, he keeps saying something's wrong with the bull. The doctors think it's trauma, but I know Trevor. Even in his condition, his mind is still sharp. What if he saw something we missed? After ending the call, Jake sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. If Trevor's injuries were more severe than initially thought, and if they were caused by abnormal bull behavior, then every rider on the circuit was potentially at risk. But more than that, if Trevor had noticed something during his final ride, some detail that could help explain what was happening, they needed to find a way to access those memories before it was too late. Dr. Mitchell, Jake said finally, I think we need to talk to Trevor. If he saw something during his ride with Diablo's Revenge, something that might explain the bull's behavior, it could be the key to figuring this whole thing out. A brain-injured patient's memories might not be reliable, she warned. Trauma can cause false memories or distort real ones. But it's still more than we have right now, Jake argued. And if Trevor dies, he couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the possibility that his friend might not survive his injuries. Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. All right, let's go to the hospital. But first, I want to examine Gentleman's Choice and get blood samples. If we're going to convince anyone that there's a systematic problem affecting the bulls, we need solid evidence. As they drove toward the Austin Rodeo grounds in Dr. Mitchell's pickup truck, Jake couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere felt compared to just a week ago. The parking lots that should have been filled with families eager to watch the competition were half empty. The vendors who normally did brisk business selling Cowboys hats and belt buckles were standing idle, their faces reflecting the uncertainty that had settled over the entire rodeo community. Look at that, Dr. Mitchell said, pointing toward the main entrance where a small group of protesters had gathered with signs reading, Rodeo equals animal abuse, and Stop the Violence. Word is spreading that something's wrong, even if people don't know exactly what. Those protesters have been showing up at rodeos for years, Jake replied, though he had to admit the group seemed larger and more organized than usual. But you're right, people are starting to ask questions. At the stock pens behind the arena, they found Gentleman's Choice standing alone in his enclosure, his head hanging low and his breathing labored. The bull that had been known for his calm temperament and reliable bucking pattern now seemed agitated and unfocused, pacing restlessly despite his obvious fatigue. This is definitely not normal behavior, Dr. Mitchell observed as she prepared her examination equipment. Gentleman's Choice has been on the circuit for 6 years. He's as predictable as they come. Jake watched from outside the pen as Dr. Mitchell approached the bull, speaking in soothing tones and moving slowly to avoid startling the animal. But even from a distance, he could see that something was fundamentally wrong. The bull's eyes, normally calm and intelligent, now held a wildness that reminded Jake uncomfortably of Diablo's Revenge just before Trevor's fatal ride. His pupils are dilated, Dr. Mitchell reported as she conducted her examination. Heart rate is elevated, muscle tension is extreme. This looks like the same pattern I saw in Diablo's Revenge, but more advanced. More advanced how? Whatever is affecting these animals, it appears to be progressive. The longer they're exposed to it, the more severe the symptoms become. She collected blood samples and made notes in her examination log. Jake, I need you to think carefully. Are there any common factors among the bulls that have shown unusual behavior? Same feed supplier, same transportation company, same veterinary care? Jake considered the question, running through everything he knew about the various stock contractors and their operations. Jim Harrison owns both Diablo's Revenge and Gentleman's Choice, along with about 40 other bulls. If there's a common factor, it would probably be in his operation. Then that's where we start investigating, Dr. Mitchell decided. But first, let's go see Trevor. If he can tell us anything about what he experienced during his ride, it might help us understand what we're dealing with. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Jake took one last look at Gentleman's Choice, who was now standing motionless in the center of his pen, his massive head swaying slightly as if he was struggling to maintain his balance. The sight filled Jake with a deep sense of unease, not just for the animal's welfare, but for what it represented. A sport that had been built on the partnership between man and beast was being poisoned from within, and until they could identify the source, every rider who climbed into the chutes was gambling with their life. The drive to Austin Memorial Hospital was conducted in tense silence. Both Jake and Dr. Mitchell lost in their own thoughts about what they might learn from Trevor and whether it would be enough to prevent more tragedies. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising the kind of Texas thunderstorm that could wash away the dust of the arena but never the memories of what had been lost there. The ICU at Austin Memorial Hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation, a combination that made Jake's stomach clench as he followed Dr. Mitchell down the sterile hallway toward Trevor's room. Through the partially open door, he could hear the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft whisper of the ventilator that was keeping his friend alive. Amanda Hawkins looked up as they entered, her face drawn and pale from 3 sleepless nights beside her husband's bed. Trevor lay motionless beneath white sheets, his once powerful frame now seeming small and fragile, connected to an array of machines that monitored every aspect of his failing body. "The doctors say the swelling in his brain is starting to go down," Amanda said quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. "They're cautiously optimistic that he might regain some cognitive function, but—" She gestured helplessly at the tubes and wires surrounding her husband. Jake approached the bed slowly, hardly recognizing the man who had been one of the most dynamic competitors on the rodeo circuit. Trevor's face was swollen and discolored from the fall, but worse was the complete stillness. No movement below his neck, no response to voices or touch. "Amanda, this is Dr. Sarah Mitchell," Jake said. "She's been investigating some unusual patterns in bull behavior, and she thinks what happened to Trevor might not have been an isolated incident." Dr. Mitchell pulled up a chair beside the bed. "Mrs. Hawkins, I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but I need to ask you about Trevor's condition and whether the doctors have mentioned anything unusual about his injuries." "Unusual how?" "The severity of the neurological damage seems disproportionate to the nature of the fall," Dr. Mitchell explained carefully. "In my experience, even serious bucking injuries rarely result in this level of brain trauma. It's almost as if Trevor was exposed to some additional factor during his ride." Amanda frowned, clearly struggling to process the implications. "Are you saying the bull did something more than just throw him?" "I'm saying the evidence suggests that Diablo's revenge was behaving abnormally, possibly due to external factors that made him more dangerous than usual." Before Amanda could respond, Trevor's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy but undeniably aware. His lips moved slightly, though no sound emerged from his throat around the ventilator tube. "Trevor!" Amanda leaned forward, taking his hand even though she knew he couldn't feel it. "Baby, can you hear me?" Trevor's eyes tracked toward her voice, and he blinked once deliberately, a signal they'd established to mean yes during his brief periods of consciousness over the past few days. Dr. Mitchell moved closer to the bed. "Trevor, my name is Dr. Mitchell. I'm investigating what happened to you and other riders. If you can understand me, blink once." One slow, deliberate blink. "Good. Trevor, during your ride on Diablo's Revenge, did you notice anything unusual about the bull's behavior before or during the ride?" Trevor's eyes widened slightly, and he blinked rapidly several times, clearly agitated by the question. "It's okay," Amanda soothed. "Take your time." Jake leaned forward. "Trevor, it's Jake Morrison. I saw your ride from the chutes, and I think something was wrong with Diablo that day. Did you feel it too?" Trevor's response was immediate and intense, rapid blinking followed by what appeared to be an attempt to shake his head, though the movement was barely perceptible. "He's trying to tell us something," Dr. Mitchell observed. "Trevor, was there something different about how Diablo felt when you got on him? Something that made you think he wasn't normal?" One strong blink, followed by another rapid series that suggested extreme agitation. Amanda squeezed her husband's hand. "Trevor, you're getting upset. Maybe we should stop." But Trevor's eyes remained fixed on Dr. Mitchell, and he continued blinking in what seemed like a desperate attempt to communicate something important. Jake had an idea. "Trevor, I'm going to say some words, and you blink once for yes, twice for no." "Okay." One blink. "Did Diablo feel sick to you?" Two blinks. "Angry." One blink. "Scared." One very definite blink, followed by rapid agitation. "The bull was scared?" Dr. Mitchell asked. "Trevor, was Diablo's Revenge frightened of something?" The response was immediate and unmistakable. One strong blink followed by what appeared to be an attempt to nod. Jake felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. "Doc, what if the bulls aren't being made more aggressive? What if they're being terrified? What if something is scaring them so badly that they're bucking with pure panic instead of instinct? Dr. Mitchell considered this possibility. That would certainly explain the erratic behavior patterns and the extreme stress hormones in their blood work. But what could terrify a 1,500-pound bull? Before anyone could answer, Trevor's monitors began beeping more rapidly, indicating increased heart rate and blood pressure. His eyes had rolled back slightly, and his breathing became more labored despite the ventilator's assistance. "He's having another episode," Amanda said, pressing the call button for the nurses. "This has been happening whenever he gets agitated about the accident." A nurse rushed in, checking Trevor's vitals and adjusting his medication. "He needs to rest," she said firmly. "Too much stimulation can worsen his condition." As they prepared to leave the room, Trevor's eyes found Jake's one more time, and he blinked in a pattern that seemed almost like Morse code: rapid, desperate, urgent. Jake wished he could understand what his friend was trying so desperately to communicate, but the sedatives were already taking effect, and Trevor's eyes closed as he slipped back into unconsciousness. In the hospital corridor, Dr. Mitchell, Jake, and Amanda huddled together, trying to process what they'd learned. If Trevor is right and the bulls are being frightened rather than enraged, it changes everything about how we approach this investigation, Dr. Mitchell said. We need to look for sources of fear rather than sources of aggression. What could scare a bull that badly? Amanda asked. They're not exactly timid animals. Jake thought about his years of experience working with bucking stock. Loud noises can spook them, but they're used to arena noise. Unfamiliar smells sometimes, but again, they travel all over the country. Predators maybe, but there aren't any natural predators at rodeo grounds. What about unnatural ones? Dr. Mitchell suggested. Electronic devices, chemicals, pheromones, something that could trigger a fear response without being obvious to human observers? Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from Carlos. Emergency. Another incident in San Antonio. Rider in critical condition, bull had to be euthanized. We need to get to San Antonio, Jake said, showing the message to Dr. Mitchell. If this is spreading as fast as it seems, we're running out of time to figure it out before more people get hurt. Amanda looked between them, her exhaustion evident, but her determination clear. I'm coming with you. Amanda, you should stay with Trevor, Jake protested. Trevor would want me to help find answers, she replied firmly. Besides, I know the rodeo community better than Dr. Mitchell does. I might be able to help identify patterns or connections that aren't obvious to an outsider. Dr. Mitchell nodded. She's right. We need all the help we can get, and insider knowledge could be crucial. As they left the hospital, Jake couldn't shake the image of Trevor's desperate attempts to communicate something vital about his experience. Whatever was happening to the bucking stock was escalating, and the window for preventing more tragedies was closing rapidly. The drive to San Antonio took 3 hours, during which Dr. Mitchell briefed Amanda on her findings while Jake contacted other riders on the circuit, trying to gather information about recent unusual incidents. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Over the past month, there had been a significant increase in rider injuries, bull casualties, and reports of erratic livestock behavior across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. It's like a wave spreading across the Southwest, Jake observed. Starting in Texas and moving outward. That suggests a point of origin, Dr. Mitchell noted. If we can identify where it started, we might be able to determine what's causing it. When they arrived at the San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo grounds, they found the aftermath of another tragedy. 22-year-old Marcus Chun, a promising young rider from California, was in emergency surgery after being trampled by Thunder Ridge, a bull that had never shown aggressive tendencies toward humans. More disturbing was the news that Thunder Ridge had suffered what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown after the incident and had to be destroyed when he began attacking arena fences and equipment. I've never seen anything like it, said Maria Santos, the arena manager who had witnessed the incident. Thunder Ridge was always one of our most reliable bulls. Consistent bucker, never a danger to the riders after they dismounted. But today it was like he lost his mind completely. Dr. Mitchell requested permission to examine Thunder Ridge's remains, hoping to find additional clues about what was affecting the animals. Meanwhile, Jake and Amanda interviewed other riders and stock handlers, looking for any common factors that might explain the spreading crisis. What they discovered was both revealing and terrifying. Every incident over the past month had involved bulls from stock contractors who used the same feed supplier, the same transportation company, and the same veterinary service. a network of connected businesses that served rodeo operations across the Southwest. We're not dealing with random contamination, Jake realized as the pattern became clear. Someone is deliberately targeting the rodeo circuit, using the supply chain to distribute whatever is causing this. But why? Amanda asked. What could anyone gain from destroying Rodeo? Dr. Mitchell looked up from her examination of Thunder Ridge's tissue samples. I don't think destruction is the goal. I think someone is conducting experiments, using the bulls as test subjects and the riders as collateral damage. The implications were staggering. If she was right, then every rodeo event, every practice session, every moment a rider spent on the back of a potentially affected bull was part of an uncontrolled experiment with human lives hanging in the balance. As storm clouds gathered over San Antonio, mirroring the dark turn their investigation had taken, Jake realized that they were no longer just trying to solve a mystery. They were racing against time to expose a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything he'd dedicated his life to achieving. The warehouse on the outskirts of Corpus Christi looked abandoned from the outside, its corrugated metal walls weathered by years of Gulf Coast humidity and salt air. But inside, Dr. David Kellerman was conducting the most ambitious behavioral modification experiment in the history of animal psychology, using cutting-edge neurochemical compounds and electromagnetic field generators to induce controlled fear responses in large mammals. Jake Morrison crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, watching through night vision binoculars as white-coated technicians moved between rows of holding pens containing bulls from across the Southwest. The animals were clearly distressed, pacing restlessly and showing the same agitated behavior he'd witnessed in Diablo's Revenge and the other affected bulls. I count at least 30 bulls in there, he whispered into his radio headset. And they're all showing signs of the syndrome. 300 yards away, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was positioned near the warehouse's main entrance, monitoring communications between the facility and what appeared to be a mobile command center parked behind the building. Amanda Hawkins was stationed at the rear exit, ensuring that no one could escape once they moved to shut down the operation. They'd been tracking the conspiracy for 2 weeks, following a trail of shell companies and false identities that led from the feed suppliers and veterinary services back to this secret facility. The breakthrough had come when Amanda recognized one of the supposed veterinarians from security footage, Dr. David Kellerman, a disgraced animal behaviorist who had been banned from academic research after ethics violations involving illegal experiments on primates. The electromagnetic field generators are positioned around each pen, Dr. Mitchell reported through her headset. From what I can see, they're using a combination of infrasound frequencies and chemical agents to induce extreme fear responses in the animals. Jake felt his anger building as he watched the systematic torture of animals he'd worked with throughout his career. Many of the bulls in the warehouse were ones he recognized, champions of the rodeo circuit who were being used as unwitting test subjects in Kellerman's twisted research. What's the endgame here? Amanda's voice crackled through the radio. What does he gain from destroying Rodeo? Through his binoculars, Jake could see computer monitors displaying neurological data from the bulls, along with what appeared to be video feeds from rodeo arenas across the region. I think he's using the rodeo circuit as a real-world testing ground, he realized. The bulls get the treatment here, then get sent back into competition where he can study the results of his experiments on both animals and humans. Dr. Mitchell had worked her way closer to the main facility and was now listening to conversations between Kellerman and his assistants. Jake, you need to hear this, she whispered urgently. They're planning to escalate the program, something called Phase 3, that involves introducing the compounds into the water supply at major rodeo venues. The implications were horrifying. If Kellerman could contaminate the water systems at places like the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo or the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas, he could affect hundreds of animals simultaneously, creating chaos on a scale that would effectively end professional rodeo forever. We need to call the authorities, Amanda suggested, though her voice betrayed uncertainty about whether law enforcement would believe their story or respond quickly enough to prevent Phase 3. Jake made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation he'd developed over 15 years of professional bull riding. No, we're going to shut this down ourselves tonight. Jake, that's insane, Dr. Mitchell protested. There's no telling what kind of security measures they have in place. There are 30 bulls in there that are being tortured, Jake replied grimly. And tomorrow night, Some of those animals are going to be loaded into trailers and shipped to rodeos where they'll encounter riders who have no idea they're climbing onto the backs of chemically enhanced weapons. We stop it here, or more people end up like Trevor. The mention of his paralyzed friend settled the debate. Over the past 2 weeks, Trevor's condition had stabilized somewhat, but he remained quadriplegic and dependent on life support. The doctors were increasingly pessimistic about his chances for meaningful recovery, and Amanda had been forced to confront the possibility that her husband might spend the rest of his life as a prisoner in his own body. "All right," Dr. Mitchell conceded. "But we do this smart. Jake, you create a distraction at the main entrance. Amanda, you disable their vehicles so they can't escape with evidence or test subjects. I'll work my way inside and document everything we can use to expose the operation." Jake checked his watch. It was nearly midnight, and the facility seemed to be operating with minimal staff. Probably no more than 4 or 5 people total. The odds weren't great, but they'd faced worse in the rodeo arena, where at least the dangers were honest and straightforward. Moving carefully through the shadows, Jake made his way to the front of the warehouse where a single security guard sat in a booth, more focused on his smartphone than on watching for intruders. The lock on the main gate was surprisingly simple, suggesting that Kellerman was more concerned with keeping the bulls contained than keeping people out. Jake picked up a handful of gravel and threw it against the far side of the building, creating enough noise to draw the guard's attention away from the entrance. As the man left his booth to investigate, Jake slipped through the gate and approached the warehouse's main door. Inside, he could hear the distressed lowing of the bulls and the hum of electronic equipment. Through a window, he saw Dr. Kellerman himself standing before a bank of monitors, analyzing data from the latest round of experiments. The man looked exactly as Jake had imagined, thin and pale, with the obsessive demeanor of someone who had crossed ethical lines so many times that he'd forgotten they existed. "Fascinating," Kellerman was saying to an assistant. Subject 27 showed a 340% increase in adrenaline production when exposed to the combined frequency and chemical protocol. When we reintroduce him to the competition environment, the fear response should be sufficient to cause complete psychological breakdown in both the animal and any human in contact with him. Jake felt sick as he realized that Subject 27 was probably one of the bulls he'd ridden during his career, now transformed into a biological weapon designed to cause maximum harm to riders and spectators alike. He keyed his radio. "Doc, Amanda, I'm going in. Whatever happens, make sure this evidence gets to the authorities." Before either woman could protest, Jake kicked in the warehouse door and strode into the facility with his hands raised, hoping to appear non-threatening while getting close enough to the control systems to cause maximum damage. "Dr. Kellerman, I presume," he called out, causing the researcher and his assistants to spin around in surprise. "Jake Morrison, professional bull rider. I'm here about what you've done to my friends." Kellerman quickly recovered from his initial shock, his expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation. "Mr. Morrison, I was wondering when someone from the rodeo community would track our research back to its source. I admit, I'm impressed by your investigative skills." "Research?" Jake stepped closer to the control panels, noting the locations of the electromagnetic field generators and chemical dispensers. "You call torturing animals and paralyzing cowboys research. I call it the advancement of human knowledge," Kellerman replied smugly. "The applications of controlled fear induction go far beyond your little cowboy games. Military applications, crowd control, behavioral modification for criminal rehabilitation. The possibilities are limitless." "And Trevor Hawkins is just collateral damage?" "Mr. Hawkins provided valuable data on the neurological effects of extreme adrenaline exposure in humans," Kellerman said dismissively. "His sacrifice has contributed to breakthroughs that will benefit mankind for generations." Jake had heard enough. With a roar of rage that would have made any bull proud, he launched himself at the nearest control panel, smashing switches and pulling cables with desperate efficiency. Alarms began wailing throughout the facility as systems shut down and emergency protocols activated. Kellerman shouted orders to his assistants, but Jake was already moving to the next bank of equipment, systematically destroying everything he could reach while staying mobile enough to avoid capture. Behind him, he could hear the bulls in their pens beginning to calm as the electromagnetic fields and chemical dispensers went offline. Dr. Mitchell's voice crackled through his headset. "Jake, I've got everything on video, and I'm calling 911 now. Get out of there." But Jake wasn't finished. The main computer system that controlled the entire operation was still running, and he suspected it contained not only evidence of what had been done, but also plans for the expanded program that would have poisoned rodeo venues across the country. As he fought his way toward the computer terminals, one of Kellerman's assistants tried to stop him with a cattle prod similar to the ones used to move livestock. Jake's years of experience reading and reacting to animal behavior served him well as he dodged the electric weapon and delivered a punch that would have made any barroom brawler proud. "You're destroying years of important work," Kellerman screamed, trying to save data from the computers even as Jake pulled cables and smashed keyboards. "Good," Jake replied, locating the main server and delivering a kick that sent it crashing to the floor. "Maybe you can conduct your next experiments in federal prison." By the time police and federal agents arrived 20 minutes later, Jake had destroyed most of the equipment and freed the bulls from their electromagnetic torture chambers. Dr. Mitchell had captured enough video evidence to document the entire operation, and Amanda had disabled the vehicles that would have been used to transport contaminated animals to rodeo venues. Dr. Kellerman and his assistants were arrested on charges ranging from animal cruelty to reckless endangerment, with federal prosecutors promising to add terrorism charges once they fully understood the scope of the conspiracy. The 30 bulls found in the facility were quarantined pending medical treatment to reverse the effects of their chemical conditioning. But for Jake, the victory felt hollow as he stood in the warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of what human cruelty could accomplish when masked as scientific research. Trevor Hawkins was still paralyzed. Marcus Chin was still fighting for his life in a San Antonio hospital, and dozens of other riders bore permanent scars from encounters with Kellerman's modified bulls. 3 months later, Jake stood at the edge of the arena at the Houston Livestock Show in Rodeo, watching young riders prepare for competition on bulls that had been certified as free from chemical contamination. The rodeo circuit had survived the crisis, but it bore new scars: increased safety protocols, mandatory testing of livestock, and a wariness that hadn't existed before the summer of 2025. Trevor Hawkins watched from a wheelchair in the VIP section, still paralyzed but alert and determined to remain part of the community that had defined his life. Amanda sat beside him, their children on his lap, all of them cheering as Jake prepared for his first ride since the events in Corpus Christi. "You sure about this?" Carlos asked as Jake adjusted his riding glove and prepared to climb onto the back of Midnight Thunder, a bull with an honest reputation and clean blood work. "I'm sure," Jake replied, though his hands shook slightly as he wrapped the bull rope around his glove. "We can't let what Kellerman did destroy what we love about this sport." As the chute gate opened and Midnight Thunder exploded into the arena, Jake felt the familiar rush of adrenaline and the pure joy of matching his skill against an animal that was bucking because it was supposed to, not because it had been chemically terrorized into madness. For 8 seconds, there was nothing in the world but the honest competition between man and beast that had always been at the heart of rodeo. When the buzzer sounded and Jake dismounted cleanly, the crowd erupted in applause that seemed to wash away some of the darkness that had settled over the sport. As he jogged toward the fence, Jake looked up at Trevor in the VIP section and saw his friend raise one finger in triumph. The most movement Trevor had managed since his injury, but enough to signal that the spirit of rodeo would survive whatever challenges it faced. The summer of 2025 had tested the rodeo community in ways no one could have imagined, but it had also proven that the bonds between competitors, families, and fans were strong enough to survive even the most deliberate attempts at destruction. As Jake accepted congratulations from other riders and posed for pictures with young fans, he knew that Trevor's sacrifice and the courage of everyone who had fought to expose the truth had ensured that future generations would be able to experience the honest thrill of 8 seconds on the back of a bucking bull. The arena lights dimmed as the evening's competition concluded, but the spirit that had carried the rodeo community through its darkest summer burned as bright as ever. A reminder that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything to preserve, and worth celebrating even in the face of unthinkable adversity. If that story already moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like so you don't miss any of our stories.